to go ahead and say too, it goes along with some of the traits that the behavioral analysis unit has put together for this type of person. They are going to be what you would consider odd or strange or on the fray of society. They are not married. They don't have a partner or a girlfriend. But they don't necessarily live alone. Normally, they live with someone. This is going to be your typical, living in the basement, or they live with their family, or they live with a group of people. They typically do live with a group of people, even though they are strange and awkward and kind of a loner type of person. When it comes to their living arrangements, they typically live with a group of people. So they're not going to be found living alone, although it's important to note that who they live with is not going to be a close partner. They don't have typically your girlfriend or wife, I should say, long-term partner. Okay, in their work, they are half of the time they're employed. Their work isn't going to be steady, but here are their jobs. Most commonly, a huge percent, actually the number one most likely job that they are going to have is they're going to be a construction worker of some type. Something in the construction worker industry. Number one top likely employer. I think that also Don Wells mentioned that he had fired somebody the day before this all went down. So I'm hopeful that the investigation has looked through all of the associates with any of the construction work going on with Don Wells. Second in line is going to be a truck driver. Truck drivers were number 2 in the top 5 employers or type of careers held by this type of abductors. You've got auto workers and service workers and food industries as the bottom 3. 34% of the time, they are going to live with parents. They can live alone 17% of the time, with a partner of some sort 16% of the time, with spouse or children 12% of the time, and with other 7% of the time. They're going to be transient in nature, meaning they're going to change residence often. And in fact, in the last 5 years, they will probably have at least one time in the last 5 years changed where they've lived at. They found 79% or more had moved in the last 5 years. 43% changed 3 or more times in the last 5 years, and 21% had moved more than 5 times in the last 5 years. And I found that interesting because I feel like that felt true to be with the person in the tent, the person that came up to stay in the shed when they were in a fight with their partner or spouse. Again, they're described to be on the fray or the fray marginal, deviant, they're non-conforming. Only 4% could be described as a model citizen versus the opposite of their victims. The victims tend to be, their targets who they abduct, tend to be the person next door, the just your normal, something that just doesn't really raise a whole lot of flags. What I mean is they're not high risk. They're not typically high risk. They're typically going to be from a suburb or from their home. They're not homeless. They're not street people. They're not presenting themselves to be at a high risk level. 40. These are words that were found and associations to people to describe them as being strange 40% of the time. To be associated with drug abuse 32% of the time. I'm sorry, alcohol abuse was 32% of the time. Drug abuse was 27% of the time. Friendly to children 21% of the time. Reclusive 20% of the time. Sexually promiscuous 19% of the time. And transient or semi-transient 16% of the time. That's not what they were. This is how you would describe them to be. The importance of that is because of how often it is and how likely it is for a person to present a false self to the world and to their friends around them. So it's how they're going to maybe be described. That's how many of the percentages. That's the number of how they're described. It doesn't necessarily reflect where they truly fall, obviously, because transient, to be described as transient, fell at 16%, and we know that actually a transient type of personality is going to be a huge factor in the type of abductor that's going to fall into a particular crime where it's a non-family abduction. Okay, what's also interesting is this applies to Summer Wells because of her being female. If a child is male, they are more likely to be harmed by somebody that knows them, like their mother or their step parents, their biological parents or step parents. If they are harmed by them, 9 times out of 10, it's male over female. I would like to find out what that reason is, but I'm just going by stats, what's told in the criminal Department of Justice criminal investigations for abduction. And when it's female, it's 9 times out of 10 going to be that they are the targets of this type of abduction. I thought that was really interesting. If it is male, they're usually much younger, like 7 and under. And for that, I can imagine it's because they're not going to fight as much. They're more vulnerable. Okay. It's important to remember that the investigation began as a missing child that was taken, walked away, or disappeared. A stranger was looked for, but small cases led to family members or immediate family. It usually comes back to being a stranger or someone that kind of barely knows the family, but they are normally, in a large amount of times, they have been looked at by the investigation at least one time. And a large amount of the time, they are even assisting in the investigation itself. I think that's astounding that it's very likely that the investigators already have spoken to this person. And they might even be actively assisting in the investigation. That was flooring. For Summer's particular age group, the relation for ages 1 through 5, the likelihood that it was a stranger involvement is only 28%, but for a friend or an acquaintance, it goes up to an astounding 64% being a friend or acquaintance, with as low as only 8% being family or an intimate member of the family. It's interesting that those numbers these numbers and stats change for age group 6 through 9. They look drastically different. Age group 10 through 12, drastically different. 13 through 15, hugely different again. And 16 and 17, you've got that 64% that was likely it was a friend or an acquaintance that was the abductor. In the age range of 16 to 17, that 64% is a stranger. it's more likely a stranger that is to be the one that's responsible. And it is important to note that between males and females on the target, it is a very different person that commits the crime. When it's a male victim and target, it's very more likely to be the family or close in, like step parent, the family, or the mother or the father or the stepmother or father. But when it's a female, it is much more likely that it's going to be that acquaintance of the family. So again, male, white, fray of society, unemployed by 50% or more. But if they are employed, they are a construction worker or some kind of unskilled type day worker in that construction area. Overwhelmingly, number one career. But followed by number two, so I need to mention it, is truck drivers. In the 50% that you could find, or near 50, that was employed, their trade falls in truck driver. So the rest of those in order, 3, 2, and 1, you've got they're like a food worker or a student or service provider or an auto tech of some kind. They move often, at least once in the last 5 years, but sometimes as much as 5 times in the last 5 years. They're most likely to be a friend or an acquaintance, followed second closest by a stranger. They are likely to have a history of sexual offenses, but it's important to note that pornography is not one of those offenses. Pornography will not be something that we need to look at for whatever reason. Porn does not fall in one of their crimes. They're not going to have porn downloaded on their phones or their personal devices or their home computers. They're not in that ring of offenders. That's not the type of predator that they are. Porn is not on the table for this one for whatever reason, and I found that very, very interesting. Although they will be classified as a sexually deviant, and that could just be a lot more information that we would have to know about their personality, but that they do have that sexual deviant nature. It's a trait. It's marked and defined by the Justice Department. They are 98.5% male. Most of the time, this is a sexually motivated crime. They will be unmarried, single, or divorced. Large percent of them live with their parents. They are not loners in the strictest form because 83% of them do live with someone else. But they're not married to whoever it is. And one really huge factor that had occurred in a large percent of these abductions is that there is conflict with females, and that can include marital problems. Most commonly, it's problems with the female. And at the time of an incident occurrence, there had just been some type of problem, some kind of huge thing had just set them off. Likely an argument with a female or a family member. Maybe they were fired. Something happened, some kind of argument spurred, and this sets them off. And it was a huge point. The behavioral analysis unit have found that this is just a trait of behavior that they've found and noticed. So anyways, I think that's what I'm going to record and put down for now. I have more, but I just feel like that was at the top of it that I could put together. I've been wanting to really get this down for quite some time, and I just needed a minute alone to do it. And now that it's been longer. It's been longer since I've been able to get it down. I've researched and gotten so much further that the video would just be extensive, and it was getting to be very extensive as to what I could actually record and put down. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to go ahead and put this amount down and just come back and record later, because there was just so much, it was getting lost in my mind. But these were a lot. I really think I touched on the main points, and just really praying for Summer, praying for everybody that's boots on the ground or has been or has touched this investigation in any way whatsoever. Please be kind to everybody that you come across, especially dealing with this case. But in any aspect of your life, we can always use a little bit more kindness out there. Please remember to subscribe, share, like, and comment if you can. And be looking for the next video. Thanks.